Hi. Okay, this is a new Nigeria with Olawale Oluwade. Briefly, I'll speak about the papal elections we all witnessed last week and the lessons for charismatic churches. The papal elections of Pope Leo the XIV, and what lessons can charismatic movements learn? Now, what lessons can we learn in last week's papal selection, or is it election process? In my lifetime, so far, I have witnessed, well, via television, three papal elections. It's the same process, although with different outcomes in terms of personality that emerge eventually as pope. In 2005, as a fully matured adult, 1978, of course, I was here, but I didn't know what was going on. I was still just a young boy. But in 2005, I witnessed on TV or via television the election of Pope Benedict the 16th, as Pope, intellectual, hardline, conservative enforcer, of strict Catholic doctrine and theology. Then second, in 2013, Pope Francis, liberal reformer, moral force, and people-centered. And then just last week, May 2025, Pope Leo the XIV, a centrist or moderate pope, but leaning more in the Francis's footprints. I also witnessed that process. Now, remarkably, there has been no dissent. Even the previous elections, no dissent, no scandals of any sort, no controversy. Trailing the election process, no scandals, no salacious stories in the media, nothing, absolutely nothing. Seamless process, just strict observance of tradition and laws of the church, the Catholic Church, handed down, from generations and scrupulously adhered to by the custodians and guardians of the institution. Now, Catholic Church, the Catholic Church isn't an institution without heavy controversy or its share of seedy. It's got its own share of a seedy underbelly. In our over 2 millennia of existence, the Church has experienced and traversed the many shades of crisis, the purges, or Inquisition, where heretics, those the Church termed heretics, were burnt. Some, were guillotined. Some fried in oil. Some impaled. Even Jesus Christ was impaled, etc. Also, the tyrannies of the popes. Popes in previous centuries, were tyrannical. The many massacres of the Catholic Church, the Crusades embarked upon, by the Catholic Church, and also the church's romance with dictatorship, Hitler's Nazi, Mussolini's Italy, the many kings of England, working in cahoots, with the church to perpetrate many atrocities. It was also the end of the, it was the romance with the kings that also saw the end of the Catholic Church reigning over England, and then the emergence of the Protestant movement. Also, the church's romance, with Latin American dictators. Also, I cannot but help to mention the horrific sexual abuse scandals, and so on and so on. Now, and the church also wasn't always in our history just about religion, that is ecumenism and evangelical duties. It's morphed from pseudo royalty and spiritual potentate over a vast and sprawling empire in Western Europe, to now just being a spiritual head presiding over roughly 1.4 billion devoted parishioners in all the world's, continents. Yet, through it all, the Catholic Church has adapted, endured, and as it is obvious, survived to remain not merely an institutional relic, but a major force for good and a genuine global voice for spiritual, moral, and ethical leadership. Pope Francis, even Pope Benedict before him, reminded us that there's a need for a strong moral and ethical voice in a world suddenly, becoming crazy all over again. Now, in a world currently confronted with the echoes and reincarnation of ancient tyrants, driving populist movements and political parties which feed a horde of disenchanted masses with a concoction of poisonous and deadly doses of lies, hate, divisions, and fear. The world's last bastion of hope and compassion, is the church, specifically the Catholic Church. I say this because the Catholic Church has got the institutional, historical, and political strength and global reach needed for this daunting role. So, the splintered members of the Catholic Church, everyone is an offshoot of the Catholic Church, everyone, can learn and inculcate a lesson or two, from the Catholic Church. But why, has the Catholic Church endured throughout the various turbulent centuries and eras to still be a powerful, positive voice even now? Why? Why has this church, endured and survived and is still strong? I mean, the whole world, practically, literally, was revetted. Those who went to Rome and those of us glued to our television sets, the world over, wanting to know who's going to be the next pope. Why? So, first reason, the church is of God. The Catholic Church is of God. Here's what Gamaliel, Pharisaic doctor of Jewish law, said in the Bible, and I quote, "And now I say to you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this work is of men, it will come to nothing. But if it is of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest you even be found to fight against God." You can find the story in Acts 5:34 to 39. They arrested the apostles, the early apostles, Peter and the rest of them, and they wanted to kill them. But this guy, Gamaliel, a doctor of Jewish law, stood up in the court, and said, "No, just let them go." This other one, started something, a revolution with his band of renegades, and then when they killed him, the group splintered and just fizzled out. Another one did that, the same thing happened. So this same one, just let them be, whip them and let them go. If it's of God, it will stand. There's nothing you can do against it. If it's not of God, it will fizzle out. The question is, has the Catholic Church fizzled out? You know the answer. Now, second reason, structure and organization. One, it is not personalized. The Catholic Church is not personalized. It has a strong and robust organization and administration that is built on sound structures and systems. Then, this entire organization itself functions like a well-oiled and efficient German machine. On these two alone, that is, the church is founded by God, called of God, built by God, and second, the institutions, the structure and the systems. On these two alone, other churches, particularly Charismatics or Evangelicals or Pentecostals, can learn great and invaluable lessons. So I ask, how many who founded churches today are actually called by God in the Charismatic or Evangelical or Pentecostal movement? How many who are founders of churches were actually called by God? Second question, how many of those called are actually chosen of God? And then third, how many of these churches that the founders were called of God and chosen by God have robust structures and systems that are built to withstand the shocks and stress of not just now, but specifically or especially the future? So if we subject most evangelical churches, Pentecostal churches, one of my friends, call them mom and pop shops, if we subject most of this to a stress test or of major headwinds, how many of these churches would survive? How many? And there is no better example of sound organizational system, or structures than, a robust succession planning. What we witnessed is succession planning. And I just told you I've witnessed 3 in my lifetime as an adult. And it's been seamless. No scandals, no stories, no hiccups, no lawsuits. So, here's my take. If you pioneer a church, haven't been called by God, then you position your child for succession. You have already missed it. That action alone has set a limit on your organization's durability. Why? Is this scriptural? What I said, is it scriptural? Yes. In the Old Testament, Kings mostly installed their children as successors. But there was no church in the Old Testament in the way we know church, But in the New Testament, however, when the disciples of Jesus wanted to replace Judas, one of the 12 disciples who sold Jesus out, for 30 pieces of silver, and then he died, committed suicide. When the remaining apostles wanted to replace him, what did they do? They prayed and then they voted. They cast ballots amongst the remaining disciples, about 120 of them. And Matthias was chosen to replace Judas. Find this story in the book of Acts chapter 1 from verses 15 to 26. This is the tradition the Catholic Church has held firm to for over 2,000 years. That's what we witnessed last week. The outgone Pope didn't singly, nominate a successor. The body of cardinals, 133 men from 70 different countries, gathered together, prayed. We all saw it, and they chose one of them. Now, Jesus, who birthed the church, had no wife, let alone a child. He singly named Peter his successor. Yes. So if you say by singly nominating your child to be your successor, you can do it. My question is, are you Jesus? If you say you are imitating Jesus, are you Jesus? Then in the same token, why did Peter, if anybody says they want to imitate Jesus, Peter should have imitated Jesus. I just told you how the remaining disciples nominated one to replace Judas. Why did Peter not singly nominate Matthias? Why? Because Peter knew he wasn't and can never be Jesus Christ. So the reason why evangelical organizations don't outlive, most of them do not outlive their founders or become a shadow after the founder's passing, are a lack of systemic governance and the attempt to dynastize. That's my coin of the word dynasty. The attempt, to dynastize the Church of Christ, which is antithetical to scriptural precedent. The call of God is not by hereditary or filial relationships. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.